Do you know someone who got fired on their first day? What did they do? His last job, he was driving cars from where they were dropped off to where they were sold at auction. He was driving this really nice BMW sitting at a stop sign at the base of a hill. Semi-truck carrying logs loses its brakes and slams him at 50 mph. He then proceeds to T-bone another car while still getting pushed by the semi. Him T-boning the other guy knocked him out from in front of the semi and into another car which had seen what was happening and slid to a stop. The semi went over the hill and landed in the creek at the base. He got cut out of the car then airlifted out, along with the driver of the semi and the passenger of the car he T-boned, and when he called his boss, after emergency surgery, the boss fired him. He sued the hell out of the company for wrongful termination and he's been living off the money for 3 years. I worked at a gas station a while back. Helped train this new guy. He was a really nice, we all liked him. First solo shift he walks away with $150 out of the register. Didn't even try to cover it up or anything. Everybody was shocked. WTF did he think was gonna happen? That he would make 3 days pay in one and never have to come back? Worked at a 50s themed restaurant. Kid names Joe gets a job as a busyboy. Was told to clean tables and set them. Nothing more. Nothing less. First table he cleans he steals the tip. Server, foolishly, gives him the benefit of the doubt. Joe's next act of defiance. He approaches a friendly and elderly regular. They get to chatting and the gentleman brings up that he has just had serious dental surgery. Joe is intrigued and begins failed negotiations with the gentleman for painkillers. The negotiations turned to pleading and my manager intervened and promptly fired him. This all happened within the first hour. I fired a guy who showed up 4 hours late his first day. I was in a moving company at the time. When he showed up he asked if he still gets paid for the job. Since the bill includes 4 people and we did the job with 3, I told him to walk home and not to bother showing up the next day. I work in a college town and we hired a new part-timer to work reception. On her first day she casually mentions to us that her wealthy parents want her to experience what it's like to struggle. So she has to work a job and use the city buses for 2 months and then she can quit and her parents will give her allowance back and get her a new car. Boss: wait, so you're going to leave in 2 months? Her: yeah, that's what my parents said. Boss: can I talk to you in my office? Not personally, but one of my favorite Reddit stories is of the teenage kid who got fired on his first day of working at the supermarket for eating all the skin off the rotisserie chickens. I'm gonna need that link. I was a pizza delivery guy at a family-owned Italian restaurant. They brought a guy in to help make pizzas. 2 hours into his training he starts talking about wanting to bang the waitresses. The waitresses were the daughters of the owner. The guy teaching him how to make the pizzas was the older brother. He was physically ejected from the building. I'm noticing a lot of the stories on this thread are people who couldn't shut the duck up lol. Knowing when to shut your pie hole is easily the greatest and most underrated skill any human being can learn in their lifetime. Got fired on my first week, after training when the schedule came out. I was in high school and during the interview I told the manager interviewing me that I could only work 20 hours a week. I didn't mind 8-hour days on weekends but during the week I couldn't do it. As soon as training ends, the schedule comes out and I'm scheduled to work 39.5 hours with several 8-hour shifts on weekdays after school. I went into the manager's office and told him that I couldn't do it and so he said, "This is why we hired you, either do it or you're fired." Well, that was that. While working on an apple orchard in Australia, the foreman would fire any German or Asian worker within their first hour simply for speaking. Wasn't the most pleasant person to work for. That's an interesting blend of racism. Did he fight in World War II? Yup, new kid around 19 or 20 comes in, warehouse job, goes out to buy weed during lunch break, gets busted, turns out he has a warrant out for him, goes to jail. Then has the balls to call us to bail him out because he lives with his grandmother and she would get upset. Edit: we didn't bail him out. Guy applied for a general manager position at the movie theater I worked at. He got the job based off him having prior manager experience at Pizza Hut or something. First day he showed up high wearing a Suns Out Guns Out tank top and swimming trunk. Also, he was wearing 2 different shoes. Owner told him to leave promptly after showing up for work that same day. How does one handle that situation? Did they just laugh and say sorry? At orientation, they told the 12 of us that we were the bestest and the brightest of 900 or so interviews they'd conducted. We got our access badges and our corporate Amex cards. One of the best and the brightest went to a high-end men's clothing store on his lunch hour and purchased $4,000 worth of suits, ties and shoes. He came back from lunch and bragged of his exploits. Fired on the spot. He actually thought his Amex card was a job perk. Can I at least keep the clothes? One guy I hired, and it turned out he had been fired from his last job on the first day. I never found out why, but I didn't have him back because he was making other employees uncomfortable, would mutter hostile things, not answer direct questions and instead just stare silently. Pretty uncomfortable stuff. I'm guessing that did it. I had to fire a janitor on day one because someone spilled a cup of coffee and he stared them directly in the eyes and yelled "duck you" at the top of his lungs. He was ducking crazy. He threatened to kill me after he was fired and stood outside of the workplace with a bouquet of flowers until we called the police on more than one occasion. I had just arrived at Great Lakes for boot camp. This was in 1991, and we are standing in line for our first introduction to what is known in the military as Operation Golden Flow, or our first urinalysis test. As I'm standing in a very long line and tip-tapping around because I have to piss so much, a guy standing behind me taps me on the shoulder and asks what we are waiting for. I look at him and tell him a urinalysis. He looks at me and asks me what a urinalysis is, so I tell him to see who has taken any drugs recently. He nods, shrugs and says, "Well, I guess I shouldn't have smoked that crack last night." He was serious. Now, he officially wasn't fired that first day, but about 2 weeks later when his results came back he was. So yes, you can say that he was fired that first day but had to suffer for a few weeks until officially let go. I fired someone about 2 hours into the first day. We had a monster pile of branches to send through the wood chipper and 2 of my better guys were working on it. I hire a new guy to help out. I spend all this time training him how not to get killed by the wood chipper and sent him out with my 2 guys. I run out a bit later to check on him and I see me experienced guys getting it done. They are busting their butts and putting in work chipping branches. New guy on the other hand picks up a twig and tosses it in the chipper, grabs a drink of water, grabs another twig, another drink, goes and has a smoke, another few twigs etc. I had to let him go. I know of someone. Harlan Ellison, the writer. Ellison was hired as a writer for Walt Disney Studios but was fired on his first day after Roy O. Disney overheard him in the studio commissary joking about making a pornographic animated film featuring Disney characters. I managed a smoothie place for a while and hired this kid for mornings. His first day he was 2 hours late. He apologized for being late because he was tripping on shrooms and got lost on the way to work. He also took 15 smoke breaks in the 4 hours that he worked. When his shift was over I told him not to come back. You let him work 4 hours when he told you he was late because he was tripping on shrooms? You must have really needed people. It's a smoothie place. If he'd only taken 2 to 3 smoke breaks he'd have been Employee of the Month. Friend was hired and then the next day the company announced layoffs. Of course he was first to go. He got lucky though because for one reason or another they had to continue paying him for the next 2 months even though he only worked a total of 2 days. Halfway into that 2 months he found a better job. I had that happen for a contracting gig. 3 days work, 2 weeks payout because the contract stated they had to give a minimum notice. Seems like they would still have you work those 2 weeks? I got fired on my first day. Reason, his best mate just lost his job so he fired me and hired him instead. Shitty thing to do. Sorry man. The tech support person was an amateur. Always specify at the same time when telling people key combinations like that. You learn very quickly to be as explicit as possible about every single action so the novice on the other end doesn't screw up your process. My company hired temps for this big job. We didn't have a lot of space, so temps had to double up in cubicles. I did feel very bad for them, but some of their actions were hilarious/terrible. Our laptops require a password to log in before doing anything. It's a gray screen with prompts for the username and password. Pretty simple stuff. One guy had his username and password written on a post-it note. He then spent 2 hours trying to figure out how to log in. He didn't realize he had to press enter. 2 hours. Another guy was chugging along at his task. His cube mate was sneezing or talking or something. His reaction? Slap her. He got escorted out of the building. The next day, he shows up to work again like nothing happened. He was escorted back out and told to please not return. Most of the temps were nice and did just fine. Some made you wonder if they would ever get a full-time gig. Had a buddy get hired as a valet in downtown. On his first day he was asked to park a pretty expensive luxury car and ended up hitting it onto the concrete pillars in the parking garage. Pretty much got fired on the spot. This was my biggest fear when I started my valet job. I made it almost a year before I wrecked a car. Didn't get fired, though. What did happen? First big job after college, I worked for an MSP, IT consultants/engineers. They hired a new guy and his first assignment out of the gate was one of our tougher clients to deal with. This guy was to go out and replace a switch, config and all. 4 hours later he still wasn't done. Come to find out he had no clue what he was doing. We hired him as desktop support and they were having him do network stuff. They called him in and fired him that day. I felt really bad for the guy. Second day. She was visiting one of our production sites and thought the second day was starting too early, so she called down to the local leadership team to say she'd be in that afternoon, if at all. She was on the next flight home instead. Dude was fired not even an hour into his first day. I worked at a warehouse for about 3 months, and the company was moving to a new location, so we were taking all the boxes off the racks, putting them on pallets, wrapping the pallets, and loading them onto several different trucks. One of my bosses was sent over to help train the new guy, but the new guy didn't know he was working with a boss. Halfway through our first pallet, new guy dropped a box he was supposed to catch because he was too busy texting. He started bitching about how the box landed on his foot and he wasn't sure if he could keep lifting boxes now, so we sent him with a different group that was taping up the pallets. Once we finish our second pallet, the boss and I take it over to be tapped. The boss specifically requested that the new guy take care of it. Turns out new guy is missing. I'm now given the task of finding him. 10 minutes later I find a pile of clothes sitting on the ground in the back of the warehouse. I walk around it and absolutely could not believe what I was seeing. This guy took the clothes out of several boxes, broke the boxes down and laid them out on the floor, and I shit you not, this guy was ducking, recording himself breakdancing. It was actually mine and another guy's second day. He got fired for a dispute. He was left hours away from where we started. I voiced my concern for leaving this kid hundreds of miles from known civilization and was also fired. It was good times. Never got paid for the first day and a half either. I can't believe you didn't get paid. We fired a guy after 1 hour of orientation and had to pay him for it. When I worked student tech support while in school, my boss told the story of one of the only times she'd had to fire someone. Within just a couple of days of training ending, it came out he was installing some sort of remote desktop software on every computer he touched, meaning he could access all of them from his own PC. These were students' private computers, not lab machines. Just to make it easier when they needed help again. But no one bought that. He was obviously immediately fired and faced disciplinary action with the school. I hope they paid for an advanced cleanup for these computers in case he had installed other software. Like the one that spy on your webcam. I worked at a Monsanto corn warehouse a few years ago with my brother. One day a new guy comes in and was training on a forklift. After a couple hours he was on his own and after about 20 minutes of that he crashed his forklift into the wall. He shut the lift down, got up and walked out of an emergency exit door and drove away. 6 months later we had a new boss and he is training a new guy, which just so happens to be the exact same guy, but he was going by a different name. He got fired a month later for too many forklift accidents. He was hired on Friday at about 5 p.m. and his first shift was the following day, 7 a.m. Saturday. We are mechanics, we don't respect Monday Fridays sometimes. Well, he showed up to work at 6:50 a.m. Saturday morning completely shit-faced. He was asked to not clock in. Ever. Well, at least he showed up early. Susan Smith up in here. I got fired after my first week because of charges on my record that never occurred. I had to go to the police and have another background check run, contact hour. I was then hired. It was honestly a tough week getting all that straight, and now I wonder how many jobs I didn't get because of this mix-up. I have a really generic name, and share part of a social security number with a person that has the same name as well. Apparently he likes to beat his wife up. Edit, I failed to mention that HR accepted their F-up, and apologized profusely. I feel like the hour lady thought she might lose her job. Pretty odd situation. Kid came to work his first day at a landscaping company I worked for. We went out on a job, and afterward the boss told him to gas up the truck. He did exactly what they asked. Turns out it was our work truck that leaked oil like a sieve. Boss was too cheap to fix it, No one told him everyone puts in new oil when they fill it up. So when the engine seized up later on, guess who got fired for it? That's bullshit. This is how you make people say how bad a company is. Dude got caught checking his email on the company computer. Which wouldn't necessarily be so bad, except the email attachment he opened was one of those PowerPoint slideshows with X-rated content and a soundtrack set to full volume. I've never seen a sexy PowerPoint before, did not realize that is a thing. My dad's friend was a car salesman for a little while at a Chevy dealer. Apparently, while he was working there, they hired a new guy, and they asked if he wanted to test drive any of the cars. So he says he wants to test drive one of the Corvettes. They say great, so one of the managers goes with him. The guy goes way too fast down a country road and crashes the thing into a tree. The manager was obviously upset, but the guy still wasn't actually fired. He just said okay, we have to go back to the dealership and file an insurance claim, also you aren't allowed to drive the cars anymore. The guy apparently starts yelling about how he can't afford to pay for the car and just starts running down the road. They end up calling the cops, and not only does the guy get fired, but he also gets arrested. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit X. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.